The observation deck of the Galactic Assembly Station hung suspended between three suns, casting everything in a perpetual twilight of amber and violet. Ambassador Nora Westfield stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the representatives of 47 species filter into the Grand Hall. She was unremarkable by human standards. Medium height, brown hair beginning to show silver at the temples, and eyes that carried the weight of too many diplomatic failures. But today, those eyes held something different, something patient. The Krell Dominion had summoned this emergency session. Their representative, High Marshal Vorkuth, was an imposing figure of chitin and muscle, standing nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms that ended in claws designed for rending flesh. His species had ruled the Eastern Spiral Arm for 6,000 years, building their empire on the bones of 17 conquered civilizations. Today, he wore his battle insignia, each mark representing a world brought to heel. Nora watched him take the central platform, his movements deliberate and theatrical. Around her, the other human delegates remained perfectly still. James Okonkwo, her military liaison, stood to her left, his dark hands resting calmly on the railing. To her right, cultural attaché Lin Zhao adjusted her glasses, a small gesture that betrayed nothing of her thoughts. The assembly chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, a sphere where artificial gravity allowed each species to orient themselves according to their comfort. Some hung from the ceiling, others floated in zero-G bubbles, and still others stood on platforms like the humans. The air shimmered with translation fields, ready to convert Vorkuth's words into every language present. "This assembly convenes under ancient protocol," Vorkuth began, his voice reverberating through the chamber like thunder. "The Krell Dominion brings forth an accusation of territorial violation against the species designated as humanity." Holographic displays materialized throughout the sphere, showing 6 star systems. Each one contained human colonies, small settlements tucked into asteroid belts or orbiting gas giants. They looked peaceful, almost fragile against the vastness of space. "These systems fall within the Krell expansion corridor," Vorkuth continued. "They were marked for annexation 3 centuries before humans even achieved faster-than-light travel. Yet we find human settlements here, mining operations, research stations, even families with children." His mandibles clicked in disgust. "When we sent official warnings, do you know how humanity responded?" He gestured, and a new hologram appeared. It showed a simple text message. "Thanks for the heads up. We'll take it under advisement." Ripples of reaction spread through the assembly. The Quillian delegates, beings of pure energy contained in crystalline shells, pulsed with colors that suggested amusement. The Morphinian collective, a hive mind of insectoid creatures, buzzed with what might have been concern or anticipation. "Under advisement," Vorkuth repeated, each word heavy with contempt. "The Krell Dominion does not advise. We do not suggest. We command. And when our commands are dismissed with such casual arrogance, we respond in the only language that primitive species understand." He spread all 4 arms wide. "The Krell Dominion hereby declares a state of active warfare against the United Terran systems. We will claim what is rightfully ours. We will remove the human infestation from our expansion corridor. And we will teach this young species the lesson that 29 worlds before them learned. The Krell do not negotiate with those who lack the strength to defend their claims." Behind Vorkuth, 6 other Krell warriors stepped forward, each wearing different armor that signified various military divisions. The display changed again, showing the Krell war fleet, 8,000 ships, ranging from nimble fighters to massive dreadnoughts, capable of cracking planets. It was an armada that had never known defeat. The assembly erupted in controlled chaos. Species began broadcasting on private channels, already calculating trade routes and alliances. Some saw opportunity. Others saw entertainment. A few saw tragedy. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Assembly for only 53 years, long enough to establish themselves as capable traders and curious explorers, but nowhere near long enough to build a military that could challenge an empire like the Krell. Assembly Director Kulner, a being who resembled a floating mass of bioluminescent tentacles, projected its voice through the translation field. The accused species will now respond. Ambassador Westfield, the chamber recognizes humanity. Nora stepped forward to the edge of her platform. Every sensor in the vast sphere focused on her. She took a breath, then smiled. It was not the smile of someone afraid. It was not the smile of someone bluffing. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment and was relieved it had finally arrived. "We accept," she said. The chamber fell into a silence, so complete that the hum of the station's fusion cores became audible. Thousands of eyes, sensors, and perceptual organs fixed on the small human woman. "We accept your declaration of war." "High Marshal Vorkuth," Nora continued, her voice carrying perfect clarity. "The United Terran Systems acknowledges the state of hostilities between our peoples. We will respond as we deem appropriate." Vorkuth's mandibles clacked in confusion. "You accept? Just like that? You do not grovel? You do not offer tribute?" "No," Nora said simply. "You understand what you face?" Vorkuth gestured at his fleet display. "We have crushed species with 10 times your resources. Our warriors train from the moment they can walk. Our weapons have been perfected over millennia. You humans have been in space for barely 2 centuries. What armies do you have? What weapons? What hope?" Nora's smile never faltered. She reached up and tapped the small communication device behind her ear. "Computer, access the Terran Historical Archive. Category: Military Conflicts, Subsection: Total War. Time frame: years 1900 through 2150. Common Era. Authorization: Westfield Omega-7. Grant full assembly access." A new holographic display materialized, separate from the Krell's imposing fleet. It appeared as a simple directory tree, branches spreading out with thousands upon thousands of files. The text scrolled slowly, showing titles that meant nothing to most species present. Battle of the Somme, Operation Barbarossa, The Rape of Nanking, Dresden, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Korea, Vietnam, Operation Desert Storm, the African Resource Wars, the Pacific Theater, the Eastern Front. "High Marshal Vorkuth," Nora said formally, "the United Terran Systems offers you and your War Council 72 hours to review these files. This is not negotiation. This is not begging. This is professional courtesy from one military power to another. I strongly suggest you take it." Vorkuth's body language shifted slightly. Something in Nora's tone had penetrated his confidence, like a cold wind finding a gap in armor. "Courtesy? You offer me courtesy? I offer you reality, human. Your colonies will be ash within 4 months. Your homeworld will kneel within a year." "Perhaps," Nora said. "Or perhaps you'll learn why humanity spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing other humans before we ever reached for the stars." She turned to leave, then paused. "Director Kulner, please note in the official record that humanity attempted to prevent unnecessary loss of life through information sharing. What happens next is entirely the Krell's choice." As Nora walked toward the exit, James and Lynn following. In perfect formation, the chamber remained suspended in shocked silence. It was not until the door sealed behind the human delegation that the noise began. Species shouting questions and theories across channels and translation fields. But one being moved with singular purpose. Professor Thane Drix was a Xena historian, one of the luminary species, beings who lived for 300 years and spent most of that time studying other cultures. His translucent form shimmered as he accessed the human database Through his neural link, he opened a file at random. The First World War. 1914 to 1918. Estimated casualties: 40 million dead, 21 million wounded. Notable developments: poison gas, machine gun tactics, aerial bombardment, submarine warfare, tank deployment. Thane's internal organs, visible through his transparent skin, began to pulse rapidly. He opened another file. The Second World War, 1939 to 1945. Estimated casualties: 85 million dead. Notable developments: strategic city bombing, atomic weapons, industrialized genocide, combined arms doctrine, amphibious assault on fortified positions. His hands trembled. He scrolled faster, his academic mind trying to process what he was seeing. The Korean conflict, Vietnam, the Yugoslav wars, the Middle Eastern campaigns, the South American drug wars that killed hundreds of thousands, the African resource conflicts that depopulated entire regions. But it was not just the numbers that made his blood run cold. It was the strategy documents, the theoretical frameworks, the military philosophy texts written thousands of years before humans reached space. Sun Tzu, writing about war as deception in 500 BCE Clausewitz, defining war as politics by other means in the 1800s. Mao, describing guerrilla warfare as fish swimming in a sea of people. Patton, speaking of audacity and speed. Zhukov, demonstrating deep battle doctrine. Schwarzkopf, coordinating operations across multiple domains simultaneously. Humans had spent their entire history fighting themselves. Every technological advancement had been weaponized. Every tactical innovation had been tested in blood. They had developed nuclear weapons capable of ending their own species, and then built enough of them to destroy their world 50 times over. They had created biological agents so lethal that international treaties banned their use, not because humans were unwilling to use them, but because they were too effective. Thane found a document titled Mutually Assured Destruction, and read about how humans had achieved peace by promising total annihilation if anyone started a war. They had held civilization-ending weapons at each other's throats for decades. Daring someone to blink first, he discovered files on human special forces operations. Groups like the SAS, Spetsnaz, Navy SEALs, and dozens of others. Humans who trained for years to infiltrate, sabotage, and kill with a precision that made professional assassin species look like amateurs. He read about snipers who could hit targets from kilometers away, about pilots who flew machines that pulled forces no other species could survive, about Marines who were trained to treat their own wounds and continue fighting. Then, Thane found the theoretical weapons humanity had developed but never deployed. Kinetic bombardment platforms that could strike with nuclear force without radiation. Nano-weapon swarms that could dismantle matter at the molecular level. AI warfare systems that had been banned after simulations showed they could win wars too efficiently. Antimatter weapons that made nuclear bombs look like firecrackers. His hands were shaking as he accessed another section, human military culture. He read about warrior traditions spanning every continent. The Spartans, the Mongols, the Samurai, the Vikings, the Zulu, the Aztecs, the Mbori, cultures that glorified combat, that raised children to see warfare as the ultimate expression of human excellence. That he read about the Marine Corps' motto, every Marine a rifleman, about the Soviet doctrine, that every citizen was a potential soldier, about the Swiss tradition of universal military service, about the Gurkhas, whose motto translated roughly to, better to die than be a coward. Then Thane accessed the section on human endurance and adaptation. He learned that humans were persistence hunters, that their ancestors had literally chased prey until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. that humans could survive in environments ranging from Arctic tundra to scorching deserts, that they had a biological mechanism called adrenaline that allowed them to temporarily exceed their normal physical limitations. During stress, he found medical documents showing that humans could survive wounds that would kill most species, that they had developed entire branches of medicine focused on trauma care because they injured each other so frequently, that human soldiers had fought on despite losing limbs, despite severe burns, despite injuries that should have killed them. The files went on and on. Thousands of battles, millions of casualties, billions spent on weapons development, an entire species that had turned warfare into a science, an art, a philosophy, and an industry. Thane finally looked up from his terminal, his luminous eyes wide. Around him, the assembly had mostly cleared, representatives returning to their ships to report what had happened. But Thane saw High Marshal Vorkoth still standing on his platform, surrounded by his war council, clearly discussing tactics for the coming conflict. The human delegation was gone, but their database remained open, available for anyone to access. Thane watched as a few other species began downloading files, curiosity overcoming their initial dismissal of humanity's warning. Across the chamber, Aquilian energy being pulsed with sudden alarm as it processed information about fusion bombs. A Morphinian scout frantically transmitted data about human guerrilla warfare tactics back to its hive mind. A Velcron merchant, known for profiting from conflicts, quietly closed its connection to the database and began calculating how to stay very, very far from human space. Thane made a decision. He opened a direct communication channel to the Krell flagship, requesting an urgent meeting with High Marshal Vorkoth's senior staff. His message was simple. I am a xenohistorian with 300 years of experience studying warfare across 47 species. You need to read these files, all of them, before you engage. The reply came back almost immediately. The Krell do not fear the past. We make the future. Thane closed his eyes. He had tried. He had done what any ethical being would do when witnessing someone about to make a catastrophic mistake. But the Krell were proud, as so many warrior species were. They would learn. Everyone eventually learned. He just hoped some of them would survive the lesson. 3 days passed. The Krell war fleet moved into formation. 8,000 ships arranging themselves into the battle patterns that had conquered worlds for millennia. Vorkoth stood on the bridge of his flagship, the relentless Fury, watching his tactical displays with satisfaction. His warriors were eager. His weapons were primed. His strategy was sound. He had glanced at the human database, of course. He had seen the numbers, the wars, the weapons. But what he saw was primitive. Humans killing other humans with chemical weapons and crude nuclear devices. Conflicts that lasted years, because neither side had the technological advantage to end them quickly. It was all very impressive for a pre-spacefaring species, but irrelevant against Krell military might. The Krell had plasma weapons that could vaporize ships. They had shields that could withstand conventional bombardment. They had faster-than-light communication that coordinated their fleet in real time. What did it matter that humans had once fought each other with tanks and rifles? Vorkoth gave the order. The fleet jumped. They arrived in the Proxima outreach system, one of the 6 human colonies marked for elimination. The planet below was small, barely capable of supporting life, but humans had terraformed a portion of it for agriculture and research. Orbital sensors showed a population of about 8,000. Deploy siege formation, Vorkoth commanded. Destroy their defense platforms. Prepare ground forces for planetary assault. The Krell fleet spread out, surrounding the planet. 6 defense platforms orbited the colony, each armed with what appeared to be basic railguns and missile batteries. They opened fire immediately. their weapons tracking krill. Ships with admirable accuracy. The battle lasted 17 minutes. The defense platforms managed to destroy 3 krill frigates and damage a cruiser before being systematically eliminated. It was a respectable showing for what were clearly automated systems, but nothing that changed the outcome. Vorkoth prepared to send his ground forces down to the colony. His soldiers would land, round up the humans, and transport them to holding facilities. The Krell did not slaughter civilians unnecessarily. They were conquerors, not monsters. The humans would be relocated, their colony absorbed into the Dominion, their resources claimed for Krell use. Then something strange happened. A single human ship appeared at the edge of the system. It was small, maybe a tenth the size of a Krell cruiser, with a design that looked more commercial than military. It broadcast on all frequencies. Krell Fleet, this is Captain Devon Cross of the Terran Defense Force vessel Quiet Answer. You have fired on human civilians. This action has consequences. Vorkoth laughed. One ship, one tiny ship against his entire fleet. Ignore it, he ordered. Proceed with planetary assault. The Quiet Answer moved. It accelerated impossibly fast, crossing half the system in seconds. Krell's sensors shrieked warnings, but by the time anyone reacted, the human ship had released something. Not missiles, not plasma bolts, just small objects, dozens of them, each about the size of a Krell warrior's head. They were moving at relativistic speeds. The first one hit a Krell battleship amidships. There was no explosion. The kinetic energy simply converted matter to plasma. The battleship ceased to exist in a flash of light, so bright it temporarily overloaded every sensor in the system. Before anyone could react, 11 more impacts followed. 11 more ships vanished. The objects were pure kinetic weapons. Massive slugs accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. No shields could stop them. No armor could withstand them. Physics itself became the weapon. The Quiet Answer turned and chunked away before the Krell could return fire. It had been in the system for less than a minute. It had destroyed 12 ships and vanished like a ghost. Vorkoth stared at his displays, his mandibles slack with shock. Around him, his crew scrambled to reorganize, to count losses, to understand what had just happened. Pursue that ship. Vorkoth roared. All vessels, jump to their trajectory. We will hunt them down and destroy them. The fleet jumped, following the Quiet Answer's trail. They emerged in deep space, far from any planet or station. Nothing was there. No human ship. No stations. Just empty void. And the void lit up. Human ships appeared from nowhere. Dozens of them, each small like the Quiet Answer, but moving with the same impossible speed. But they were not attacking with kinetic weapons, no. They were using something else. The first Krell ship to be hit did not explode. It just stopped. All systems failed simultaneously. Power, weapons, life support, everything went dark. Then the next ship. Then another. Then 50 more. The human vessels were deploying electromagnetic pulse weapons, targeted bursts that overloaded Krell systems without destroying the ships. Within minutes, 200 Krell vessels floated helpless in space, their crews trapped inside metal coffins. Vorkoth watched in horror as his fleet, his magnificent armada, was systematically disabled. The human ships did not gloat. They did not broadcast taunts. They simply moved with clinical efficiency, neutralizing threat after threat. Then they stopped. A communication came through on all frequencies. It was Ambassador Nora Westfield's voice, calm and measured. High Marshal Vorkoth, your fleet has been disabled, not destroyed. Your warriors live for now. You have 1 hour to abandon your vessels using escape pods. After that, we will begin towing your ships into the nearest star. This is your only warning. Vorkoth's pride warred with his survival instinct. His people had never surrendered. Never. To do so would be to admit weakness, to stain the honor of every Krell who had ever lived. But as he looked at his displays, at the 200 disabled ships and the human vessels circling like sharks, he understood something that made his blood cold. The humans were not fighting at full strength. They were holding back. Those kinetic weapons could have destroyed his entire fleet. Those EMP bursts could have been followed by finishing strikes. The humans were giving him a chance to save his warriors, and that was somehow more terrifying than total destruction would have been. It meant humans did not see the Krell as worthy opponents. They saw them as children playing at war, needing to be taught a lesson without permanent harm. Vorkoth gave the order. His warriors abandoned their ship's dot as Krell escaped pods dotted space like dandelion seeds. Nora Westfield's voice returned. Your people will be picked up by neutral merchant vessels we've contracted. They will be returned to Krell space unharmed. Your ships will be destroyed. Consider this a demonstration of human restraint. The next time you threaten human colonies, we will not be so gentle. The human fleet jumped away, leaving the Krell warriors floating in space, rescued by alien merchants who would tell this story across the galaxy. The great Krell Dominion, defeated in less than 2 hours by a species they had dismissed as primitive. Back at the Galactic Assembly Station, Professor Thane Drix accessed the final sections of the human military database. He found a quote from a human general named Mattis, who had lived in the early 21st century. Be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everybody you meet. Another quote from a human named Patton. No bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his. And one more. From an ancient human warrior culture called the Romans. Si vis pacem, para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. Thane finally understood. Humans had not become peaceful because they evolved beyond violence. They had become peaceful because they had perfected violence to such a degree that they frightened themselves. They had looked into the abyss of total war, had stood on the edge of self-annihilation, and had collectively stepped back. But the capacity remained. The knowledge remained. The weapons remained. And when threatened, when pushed, when some arrogant species declared war, expecting easy conquest, humanity remembered what it was. And it smiled. The smile Ambassador Westfield had worn was not cruelty. It was not arrogance. It was relief. Relief that finally, after decades of pretending to be just another peaceful species, humanity could stop hiding what it truly was. A race of survivors who had climbed to the top of their world's food chain by being better at violence than anything else that had ever lived on Earth. The galaxy had chosen war. And humanity had simply stopped pretending. 6 months later, the Galactic Assembly convened again. High Marshal Vorkoth was not present. His replacement, Strategist Prime Kelfax, stood where Vorkoth had once commanded attention. Kelfax was smaller, leaner, with eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. The Krell Dominion formally withdraws all territorial claims in disputed space, Kelfax announced. We recognize human sovereignty over the 6 contested systems. We propose a non-aggression pact with humanity to be ratified by both governments and enforced by neutral observers. Ambassador Nora Westfield accepted graciously. No gloating, no pride, just professional acknowledgement of terms. But the assembly had changed. Every species now looked at humanity differently. The cheerful traders were still there. The curious explorers still traveled the galaxy. The artists still created beautiful things. But underneath that veneer, everyone now saw the truth. After the official proceedings ended, Thane Drix approached Nora in one of the station's observation lounges. She was standing alone, looking out at the stars, holding a cup of something that steamed gently in the recycled air. "May I ask you something?" Thane said carefully. Nora nodded, not turning from the view. "Did you want this? The war?" Nora was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost sad. "No, we spent 2 centuries running from what we were. When we reached the stars and found other species, we saw a chance to be something different. To be explorers instead of conquerors. Traders instead of raiders. We thought maybe we had evolved past our nature. But you had not?" "No," Nora said. "We just learned to control it, to channel it into sports and games and stories instead of actual warfare. But the capacity was always there, waiting. And when Vorkoth declared war, when he threatened human families, human children, there was almost a sense of inevitability, like we had been waiting for this." She finally turned to look at Thane, and he saw something profound in her eyes. Not pride in victory, but sorrow for what victory cost. "Do you know what the hardest part of being human is?" Nora asked. "We remember. We remember every atrocity we committed against ourselves. Every genocide, every war crime, every moment when we chose cruelty over compassion. That weight never leaves us. And when we had to use those skills again, even against an aggressor, even in self-defense, it felt like failure." "But you won," Thane said. "You saved your colonies." "Yes, and we proved to the galaxy that the monsters from Earth's past are still here, just better trained." Nora took a sip of her drink. "Every species out there now fears us a little, and we fear ourselves a little more. That is the price of having a history like ours." Thane considered this. "What will you do now? Go back to being traders and explorers. Hope that no one else forces us to remember what we are. And maybe, eventually, we will truly evolve past our nature. But it will take time. Thousands of years, probably. Until then, we smile politely. We share our art. We trade our goods. And we hope very sincerely that nobody makes us open that old arsenal again. And if someone does?" Nora's expression was gentle but unyielding. "Then they will learn what Vorkoth learned. That humanity has been practicing warfare since before we had written language. That every advance in our civilization was matched by an advance in our ability to destroy. And that when we finally reached for the stars, we brought all of that knowledge with us." She set down her cup and extended her hand. "Thank you for trying to warn Vorkoth. Your compassion speaks well of your species." Thane took her hand, marveling at the strength in that simple human gesture. "Will there be peace now?" "Yes," Nora said with certainty, "because everyone understands the alternative." As Thane left the observation lounge, he passed by a group of young humans, probably interns or junior diplomats. They were laughing about something, sharing food, completely relaxed. They looked utterly harmless, like any other species enjoying their youth. But Thane had read the files. He had seen what their ancestors were capable of, and he understood that this casual friendliness, this apparent vulnerability, was the greatest luxury humanity had earned. They could afford to be gentle, because everyone now knew they could choose to be otherwise. The galaxy had chosen war, and humanity had reminded everyone why they had spent 10,000 years learning to avoid that choice. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal, as they always had been. But the species that lived among them had changed. They had learned a lesson written in the blood of human history. A lesson that every civilization eventually faces. Peace is not the absence of the capacity for violence. Peace is the choice not to use that capacity. And those who force others to abandon that choice bear the responsibility for what comes next. Somewhere in human space, Captain Devon Cross stood on the bridge of the Quiet Answer, watching her crew run system checks. Her ship's weapons were powered down. Her kinetic rounds were stored in their magazines. Her crew was laughing and joking as they worked, but the weapons remained. The training remained. The history remained. And if someone, someday, made the same mistake Vorkoth had made, humanity would make the same choice again. They would smile politely. They would give fair warning. And then they would remind the galaxy what it meant to threaten the children of Earth. Because some memories are too important to forget. Some lessons are written in blood and fire. And some species carry their past with them, not as a burden, but as a promise. We know what we are capable of. We choose to be better, but never mistake that choice for weakness. The galaxy had learned. And in learning, it had found peace. Not the peace of ignorance, but the peace of mutual respect. The kind of peace that lasts because everyone remembers the cost of breaking it. And perhaps, in 1,000 years or 10,000, humanity would finally evolve past its violent history, would finally become the gentle species it pretended to be. But not today. Today, humanity remained what it had always been. Survivors, warriors, and dreamers who reached for the stars with blood-stained hands and hoped that someday, somehow, their children's children would reach with hands that had never known the weight of weapons. Until then, they would smile, they would trade, they would explore, and they would remember. Always, they would remember.